Sweetheart, my mother said one evening, setting down her wine glass with that practiced sigh of exhaustion she reserved for financial talk. We have to cancel Hawaii this year, things are tight right now. I remember blinking at her across the dinner table. The words didn't make sense. Hawaii was our family's tradition 1 week every summer, escaping the noise, the stress, the pretending. It was the only time we felt normal. I looked at my father. He didn't meet my eyes. My younger brother, Chase, sat quietly beside me, scrolling through his phone as if none of this concerned him. "Is it that bad?" I asked softly. Mom nodded, looking genuinely sad, or maybe she was just good at acting. "It's just temporary, honey. Your father's business hit a rough patch. We'll make it up to you next year, okay?" I smiled and said I understood, because that's what I always did. I understood. I was the good daughter, the reasonable one, the fixer. But that night, when I went to bed, something in my chest felt off, a quiet unease. Subscribe for more stories that remind you how betrayal can sometimes build the strongest hearts. The week the Hawaii trip was supposed to happen, the house was unusually quiet. I tried to ignore the jealousy that bubbled up whenever I saw travel posts online. I worked long hours at my design internship, telling myself this was the year I'd finally move out, build something for myself. Then one night, while scrolling through Instagram, I froze. There it was. A picture my mother, my father, and Chase, standing on the white sands of Maui, all smiles, hashtags, #family vacation, #blessed, #Hawaii vibes. I stared at the screen for so long the brightness burned my eyes. My heart sank, but not from surprise, from confirmation. They'd gone without me. My mother's financial problems were nothing but an excuse to exclude me. I didn't cry, not that night. Instead, I laughed quietly, bitterly, the kind of laugh that shakes instead of soothes. I thought about every birthday I'd shared with them, every time I'd loaned them money without question, every moment I'd bent myself into something smaller just to fit their version of love. They'd always treated Chase differently. He was the golden child, charming, athletic, loud. I was the quiet achiever, the invisible one. I never needed attention, but that didn't mean I didn't deserve honesty. When they came back a week later, I played along. I pretended I didn't know. Mom bragged about how peaceful the week had been. Dad said, "You would have loved it, Sophia." I smiled. I'm sure I would have. Inside, something cold began to form, not hatred, but clarity. A month passed. I focused on work, pouring my energy into designing clothes for an upcoming charity gala. My boss, Natalie, noticed my dedication. "You're on fire lately," she said. I smiled. Pain has a funny way of becoming fuel. Then one afternoon, I came home to find my mother waiting on my doorstep. Her eyes were red, her makeup smudged. "Sophia, sweetheart," she said, forcing a trembling smile. "We need to talk." Inside, she got straight to the point, no small talk, no coffee. "Your father's business, it's worse than we thought. We could lose the house. We need help." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "What kind of help?" She hesitated. "About 150,000, just until things recover." The number hit me like a physical blow. 150,000. "Yes," she said quickly. "I know it's a lot, but you've been doing so well. We're proud of you. We wouldn't ask if it wasn't desperate." Proud of me, the word stung. Proud enough to lie to me. Proud enough to fly to Hawaii without me. I didn't say anything for a long time. Just watched her fidget, twisting the strap of her designer handbag, the same one she'd bought after the supposed financial crisis. Finally, I said, "Wait here." I went to my bedroom, opened my drawer, and took out a small white envelope I'd been saving for this exact kind of moment. Not out of anticipation, but instinct. Inside was something simple, one photograph. I walked back to her and placed the envelope in her trembling hands. She smiled, thinking it was a check. "Oh, Sophia, I knew you'd." Then she opened it. Her smile froze, her eyes widened, and then she fainted. The photograph fluttered to the floor. It was a picture I'd printed from Instagram, the one of her, Dad, and Chase in Hawaii. Only this time, I'd circled something she hadn't noticed. Behind them, in the reflection of a glass window, stood a familiar face, her own business partner. The man she'd told my father she'd cut ties with months ago. The caption below the photo, #family vacation, suddenly took on a different meaning. I called for Dad as she slumped to the ground. He came running, pale and confused. When he saw the photo, he went still. That was the night everything changed. Mom didn't speak to me for days. Dad moved out a week later. Chase stopped calling altogether. And me, I didn't celebrate their downfall. I just felt free, finally free of their lies. That was the beginning of everything, and the end of pretending. When Mom fainted, the sound of her body hitting the hardwood floor seemed to echo through the whole house like a glass shattering. I didn't rush to help her immediately. I just stood there, staring down at the photo that had slipped from her hand. For years, I had wanted her to see what she was doing, how her lies twisted everything around her. Now she finally saw it, and I couldn't decide whether it made me sad or relieved. Dad ran in moments later, shouting her name. He knelt beside her, panic written all over his face. I silently handed him the photo. He froze, his eyes flicked from the picture to me, and I saw the truth dawning on him like a sunrise he didn't want to see. She lied. I whispered, not just to me, to you too. He didn't answer. Just sat there, holding her wrist, waiting for her to wake up. When she finally came to, her face was ashen. She looked at me with tears brimming in her eyes, not from guilt, but from humiliation. You had no right, she began. No right to what? I interrupted. To find out that the financial crisis was fake, that you took Chase and your business partner on vacation and told me you couldn't afford it. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Dad's silence was worse than any yelling could have been. He stood up, looked at her, then at me. I need to think. He muttered, walking out the door. For the first time in my life, my mother, the woman who always had an answer for everything, had nothing to say. The following weeks were chaos. Dad moved into a small apartment downtown. Chase stopped coming home. The house, once filled with constant arguments and noise, now felt like an empty shell. Mom stayed in her room most of the time, curtains drawn, barely speaking. I should have felt guilty, maybe even worried, but I didn't. Because for once, she was feeling something I'd felt my entire life, being invisible. At work, things were completely different. I was alive. Natalie, my boss, had started trusting me with independent projects. One afternoon, she called me into her office. Sophia, the regional board loved your designs. They want you to lead the next collection. Me, I could barely believe it. Yes, you've earned it. The launch will be in Los Angeles. Your name's going on the label. For a second, I forgot to breathe. My name, my work, my future. That night, I went home and stood in front of my mirror. I whispered to my reflection, you did this without them, without anyone. A week later, Chase called me. His tone was awkward, unfamiliar. Hey, Soph, Mom's not doing great. Why? I asked coldly. She's been drinking a lot. She's embarrassed. You know how she is. I sighed, embarrassed because she got caught, or because she lost control. He paused. Both, maybe. What do you want me to do, Chase? I don't know. Maybe talk to her. Talk. I laughed bitterly. When she told me she couldn't afford a vacation and then went behind my back. When she called me selfish for focusing on my career. No, Chase, I think Mom needs to sit with what she's done. He sighed. You've changed, you know that. I had to. And I hung up that night. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my mind, the dinner table, the fake sympathy, the photo. But under all that anger was still a small ache. The part of me that once wanted her approval hadn't fully died. A month later, I got invited to the Los Angeles Fashion Gala, my first major event as a designer. Cameras, models, lights, and chaos surrounded me, but I'd never felt more at peace. When the first model stepped onto the runway wearing one of my gowns, the crowd gasped. I stood backstage, tears welling up. For years, I'd been told I wasn't good enough, that fashion was just a hobby. Now the world was clapping for me. After the show, Natalie hugged me. You're officially a star, she said, and then I saw her, my mother, standing near the exit in a black dress, clutching a small purse like it was armor. My breath caught. She walked toward me slowly, her face pale but composed. Sophia. She whispered, you were incredible. I didn't answer. I wanted to see you. She continued to say, I'm sorry. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but then don't ask for it. I said softly. Just live with what you did. Her eyes glistened. You think I don't already? I wanted to believe her. I really did, but the wound was too deep, Mom. I said quietly, you didn't just lie to me. You taught me what love isn't. That's something I'll never forget. I walked away. In the days after the gala, something strange happened. My story, or pieces of it, began circulating online. People started whispering about the designer who exposed her family's lies. I hadn't said a word publicly, but the photo had leaked. Someone had shared it anonymously. My mother called again, crying, "You ruined us." She screamed, "People are talking. Chase's friends won't stop asking questions. Do you know what you've done?" "Yes," I said calmly. I told the truth. "You've destroyed this family." "No," I whispered. "You destroyed it the moment you chose deceit over honesty." And then I hung up again. A few weeks later, I received a letter, not an email, not a text. A real handwritten letter from my mother. I stared at the envelope for hours before opening it. Her handwriting was shaky. "Sophia, you're right, I lied. Not because I wanted to hurt you, but because I was ashamed. The truth is, your father's company didn't fail, it succeeded. But it was built on someone else's investment. Mine. I didn't want you to know how much I'd risked for him. And when I took Chase to Hawaii, it wasn't for fun. It was to meet a client. The man in that photo wasn't just my partner, he was someone helping us survive. But I see now that I hurt you in ways I can never undo. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope that someday, when you look back on this, you'll remember that even broken love can come from good intentions. Mom, I read the letter 3 times. Was it true? Maybe. But the pain had already carved too deep a space inside me to be filled with explanations. The next day, my father called. "She's moving out of the old house," he said quietly. "I think she's finally realized she can't control everything." "Good for her," I said. And Sophia, "Yes, I'm proud of you." That was the first time he'd ever said those words. And that night, I cried not for the family I'd lost, but for the version of myself that had waited years to hear them. By the end of that year, I was standing in a new apartment overlooking the ocean. My life had changed completely. The girl they called a freeloader had become the one they now envied, but I didn't seek revenge anymore. I'd learned that revenge doesn't always mean making someone suffer. Sometimes it's simply moving on so completely that they can never reach you again. Yet deep inside, I knew my story with my mother wasn't finished. There was still one thing she didn't know, something that would change everything when I finally told her. It's strange how silence can feel louder than shouting. After the letter, Mom and I didn't speak for nearly 3 months. No calls, no texts, nothing. The house was sold. Dad settled into his apartment, and Chase, well, he'd gone silent too. During that time, I poured myself into my work. My designs were everywhere on red carpets, in magazines, even featured on morning talk shows. People started calling me the girl who turned heartbreak into haute couture. But even as my world glimmered with success, a part of me still ached for something I couldn't design peace. I told myself I'd moved on, but the truth was I hadn't, not fully, because no matter how far I went, no matter how bright the lights around me burned, the shadows of that dinner table conversation, "Why he is canceled, sweetheart," still followed me. One rainy evening, I was sketching in my studio when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. I almost ignored it until a shaky voice said, "Sophia." It was Chase. "Mom's in the hospital," he said quickly. "She collapsed this morning. The doctors think it's stress related. You should come." For a long time I said nothing. My mind went blank. Which hospital? I finally asked. When I arrived, the fluorescent lights and the smell of disinfectant hit me like a wave of memories. Chase was waiting near the entrance, his face pale. "She's been asking for you," he said softly. I followed him down the hall, my heels echoing against the tile floor. When I stepped into her room, my mother looked smaller, fragile, almost transparent against the white sheets. Her eyes opened slowly. "Sophia." "Hi, Mom," I said quietly. Tears gathered in her eyes. "You came." "I did." "I didn't think you would." I pulled a chair closer and sat beside her. Neither did I. We sat in silence for a while. Machines beeped softly around us, filling the space where words used to live. Finally, she said, "I deserved everything that happened, the humiliation, the loneliness. I brought it on myself." I didn't argue. "There was no point. I thought money would fix everything," she continued, "but it only broke us." I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who had lied, manipulated, and hurt me wasn't a villain anymore. She was just human, flawed, weak, afraid, and in that moment I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just tired. She reached for my hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling. I wanted to ask you something, before it's too late. Don't say that, I whispered. She smiled faintly. I need your help again, Sophia. The hospital bills, they're expensive. I don't want to burden your father. He's done enough. I stared at her. It was almost poetic life bringing us back to the same question, the same test. She needed money again, only this time it wasn't about greed. It was about survival. How much? I asked quietly. About $150,000. She said, almost apologetically. I know how it sounds, but I swear I'll pay it back. I don't have anyone else. I nodded slowly. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out a small white envelope identical to the one I'd given her months ago. She blinked. What's this? Take this instead, I said softly. Her fingers shook as she opened it. She looked inside and froze. Then her breath caught and her eyes filled with tears, because inside wasn't a check. It was a deed. The ownership deed to a small beach house I'd bought quietly in her name 3 weeks earlier. Her lips trembled. Sophia, I don't understand. You said you needed help. I said, you once lied to me about Hawaii, about money, about everything. But this time I'm telling the truth. You don't need to pay me back. This isn't about revenge anymore, Mom. It's about ending the cycle. She covered her mouth, sobbing silently. Why would you do this after everything I've done? I smiled faintly. Because forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something you give for yourself. She broke down, crying in a way I'd never seen before. Not the loud, dramatic crying she used to do when things didn't go her way, but quiet, fragile, real tears. For a moment, we were just mother and daughter again. No lies, no bitterness, just truth. She reached out, gripping my hand tightly. I don't deserve you, no, I said gently, but I deserve peace, and this is how I find it. Over the next few weeks, I visited her often. She started recovering physically and emotionally. Chase came around too, apologizing for always taking sides. Even Dad began to call more often. It wasn't a perfect family reunion. Life rarely gives those, but it was. Better, honest. One afternoon, as I sat by her hospital bed sketching designs, she asked, Sophia, can I tell you something? Sure. When you were little, she said, smiling faintly, you used to draw dresses on napkins during dinner. Your father said it was childish. I told him he was wrong. I looked up, surprised. I saw something in you back then, she continued. A spark I didn't have the courage to nurture in myself. Maybe that's why I tried to control you, because I was afraid of how bright you could shine. I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled. Well, I guess we both learned something. She nodded. Yes, that love without honesty isn't love at all. A month later, she was discharged. I drove her to the beach house, her new home. When she saw it, she cried again. I used to dream of living near the ocean, she whispered. Then dream no more, I said softly. We stood on the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in gold and crimson. The wind tangled our hair, and for the first time in a long time, I felt light, unburdened. She turned to me, Sophia. I fainted that day not because of what you showed me, but because I realized I'd lost you. That was my biggest fear, losing you. I took her hand. Then don't lose me again. Just be honest. She smiled weakly. I'll try. The following year, my brand reached international recognition. I was invited to Paris, Milan, and Tokyo. My designs were worn by celebrities. Interviews called me the woman who turned betrayal into beauty. But whenever people asked me what motivated me, I never talked about fame or money. I talked about truth. Because that's what my story was, not about revenge, but truth. Truth about who I was, truth about who they were, and truth about what forgiveness really means. The last time I saw my mother, she was sitting on that porch, watching the waves roll in. Her hair had turned silver. She looked peaceful. She turned to me and said, You know, Sophia, I still keep that first envelope, the one with the photo. I asked. She nodded. It reminds me of the moment I lost everything, and the daughter who taught me how to find myself again. I smiled, tears welling in my eyes. Then keep it. Maybe we both needed that moment. She reached out, squeezed my hand, and whispered, I love you. This time I didn't hesitate. I love you too, Mom. As I drove away that evening, the sky was painted in soft hues of gold. I rolled the window down, letting the wind hit my face. For the first time in years, I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel angry, I just felt free from lies, free from guilt, free from needing anyone's approval. And as the ocean shimmered beside the road, I realized something beautiful. The girl who once cried over a canceled trip to Hawaii had built her own paradise.